Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance, and accounting professionals prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to be talking about how finance leaders influence the future, a new white paper by Wharton Business Consulting with us at AICPA SEMA. I'm Tom Hood, your host, and joining me today is Liz Hirst. Say hello to everyone, Liz.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Tom. Thanks. It's great to be here with you today. So thank you very much for inviting me.
We're excited to have you. And background, Liz is a director at Wharton Business Consulting, a challenger consultancy founded in the UK to help organizations maximize their potential through their people. She's the co author of the white paper, How Finance Leaders Influence the Future. And we will post a link to that white paper in today's chat. Prior to founding Wharton, Liz spent a number of years working in Deloitte's people transformation function, has a background in business change focused around organization design, leadership effectiveness, culture, and behavior change. So let's just start with this newly released white paper, How Finance Leaders Influence the Future, Liz. How did this collaboration with us at AICPA SEMA start and come about? What prompted it? Give us a little bit of insight about that.
Sure, yeah. So we've actually been working in partnership extensively now with yourselves at the association and with SEMA, and most of that work to date has been focused around helping organisations to actually take the CGMA competency framework and to really tailor that and embed that in their organisations, primarily really with the aim of helping them to understand and provide clarity to their employees of what are the skills that finance professionals need in order to be successful. But perhaps more importantly, they've actually really been using it as well to help ensure that they're investing in the right development opportunities for their people and providing some clarity on the kind of career pathway options to actually engage and help retain their top talent. Now, as you mentioned in your introduction there, our passion at Wharton very much lies in culture, it lies in leadership and talent. So one of the things that we were really interested in once we'd started to actually work with some organizations to embed this framework was what impact has the pandemic had on the skills that finance leaders need, both from themselves and from their teams, but also potentially on the mindsets as well? And has that changed as a result of the pandemic? So really excitingly, we embarked upon this project with yourselves, and we interviewed a number of finance leaders from across the financial services landscape, both in the UK and more globally. And we sort of brought in a whole host of other findings as well. And ultimately, we've produced this paper, which has identified 4 critical mindsets for the successful finance leader of the future.
So it's so funny because we're in the midst of we have a big future of finance initiative going on right now, and we've gathered about 100 CFOs of this is mostly U.S. based but
Mhm.
global companies, and the impact of mindset and skill sets, all accelerated and driven by digital transformation, has really created it. That's why I was fascinated to see your paper and like look at your impact on mindset because not a lot of people talk about mindsets,
Mhm.
but I think you're onto something here, Liz, with this. So you talk extensively about the mindsets of a successful finance leader as opposed to the skills they need. Obviously, the skills are a component of that, but why are we seeing this shift in this importance of mindset and kind of how your paper connects to those things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think let's be clear here, Tom. Skills are still critically important. They really are. But what we are seeing is that how organisations are actually hiring, how they're developing, and how they're retaining people, that's starting to change. Now, historically, as you say, there's been more of a focus on hiring for skills, that being sort of a discrete ability or activity necessary for a given role. And those typically in finance, particularly, have been very technically focused. So around, financial accounting or reporting, management reporting, for example. However, there's also been a real increased focus, I guess, on some of those softer skills, such as effective communication or strategic thinking. But actually, more widely in the marketplace, what we're really seeing now is an evolution of how employers hire and how they develop their people. And that evolution is really focused around the fact that different skills are needed. A different mindset is needed for people to be successful in a world that is changing faster than ever and that is increasingly uncertain. And this is an individual's mindset. And that is really now being recognized as the one thing that can differentiate both performance today, but crucially, it can differentiate their potential to be successful when things continue to change and given that evolving nature of work. I think it's probably just worth touching for a moment on the difference between a mindset and a skill, because mindsets are actually a lot more complex than a discrete skill. They're really, I guess I would describe them as the mixture of the combination of traits and of abilities that together create an attitude that influences how I as an individual view and approach the world. And because of that, really, they are much more nuanced and therefore much more flexible than a discrete skill. And that's why they can really create this competitive advantage. And we're actually seeing, and I think there's some recent research by Reed, the global recruitment agency as well, who's found that organizations are increasingly hiring for mindset, and then they are developing the skills, specific skills within individuals. Because if you look historically at traditional finance training, for example, it is much easier to train for a skill than it is necessarily for a mindset. So I think if we overlay the example of finance here, it's becoming evident that for leaders to lead effectively, especially with the increasingly high levels of volatility, massive war for talent at the moment, resignation rates very much at an all-time high, and the highest inflation levels in a generation, mindset could really be that differentiating factor in the success. And it's for that reason that we focused very much on mindsets in the paper.
It's fascinating. And so interestingly enough, we did research actually with KPMG pre-COVID back in, it was released in March of 2020, interesting enough, when the COVID broke. But that research was about finance transformation, the critical success factors. And interestingly enough, mindset was the number one, and it was ranked at like 38% of successful transformation is dependent on mindset. And then skill sets were second. And to your point, you talk about it. I don't like the word soft skills because there's nothing soft about those skills. We call them success skills. I've heard them called power skills. We have to adopt a new way of talking about those that come after the mindset. But while we're here, let's go back into those mindsets. So in the paper, you identified 4 critical traits or mindsets, if you will, of finance leaders. And I love these. So connected influencer, authentic disruptor, inquisitive storyteller, and rational value creator. Can you talk a little bit about each one of these and talk about why they're so critical in today's kind of post-pandemic world? I feel like every time we think we're post-pandemic, we go backwards. But
it's a dangerous thing to say.
And then how would you advise our audience, CFOs, to actually use these in their transformation journey?
Absolutely. Sounds like a sort of 4 superheroes when you list them like that, doesn't it? I guess before I delve into each of the 4, the preface that I just want to put out there is that all 4 of these mindsets that we'll talk about in a moment are all equally important. It's not a case of, as a CFO, it's important that you make sure you're really strong in one of these. I would really encourage all CFOs to actually consider which of them do they display very naturally, which do they feel very comfortable with, versus which of them potentially do they need to be a little bit more deliberate about and actually develop the ability to display that mindset. The other nuance, I think, is that depending on, you talked earlier about finance transformation, and clearly it's still a very critical trend at the moment. But depending on where organizations and where CFOs are in that transformation journey, it might be that they actually believe one of these mindsets is more critical to them at a given point and therefore needs to be dialed up more than another. But as that journey progresses, they might find that they no longer need that to dial up that mindset as much, and they indeed need to focus on another. So with that context in mind, we'll start with the connected influencer.
Well, real quick, let me build on that, because I love your reference to dialing up. So you answered one of my big questions as I read that white paper, which is, do you pick one of those, or do you, like you said, do you find one that you're kind of naturally oriented to and maybe hone that, like strengths, like we talk about that all the time. But I love the idea that actually we probably need all four, and we ought to find the one that we're most comfortable or natural with. And then also the ones that we're not so comfortable with, begin to learn and train ourselves about those, so that now in the moment I can dial up or dial down the one that's most valuable to the stage of the transformation journey. Because one of the other things that came out of our future finance, I'm sure you'll agree with, is they actually said the reality is we're never going to be done. Like, we're going to get through this 4-year journey, and everybody's waiting for that day, and they're like, at that point everything will be changed and going again, and you'll be in another journey, right? It's like a constant quest for that. But okay, so let's go back now. So let's start with connected influencer. Is that what we're
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, so the connected influencer, they really thrive on engagement. So they very much act as a partner to the CEO. But actually, one of the things that we've seen as a result of the paper is that as a result of the pandemic, CFOs are interacting very much with all members of the executive committee. And not just the executive committee, but they're also trying to keep a real pulse on the wider organization, so across all levels. And they're doing that really with the aim of challenging the business and critically to influence decisions on how the business actually maximizes value delivery. So historically, we know that there's been a lot of emphasis and a lot of interaction between, say, the CFO and the CEO, the CRO, potentially even the COO. But what we're finding is that actually interaction has had to increase across the entire breadth. And that, crucially, is no longer just about keeping in touch with the business, but instead it's about very much influencing decision making. So using the insight that the unique position of the CFO actually gets to inform strategic direction. I think when we consider the pandemic itself, this is probably one of the mindsets that we saw come into its own, really. Now, anecdotal evidence absolutely shows that leaders who seek to connect with individuals on their team on a more personal level during the pandemic, and those who put in much more effort to create a sense of community, they were the ones that actually navigated the pandemic the best. And indeed, it's something that's really critical, I think, as we move, whenever this may be, to this post-pandemic reality that we're hoping for. But actually, that's really, really critical that they continue to do that in order to retain their motivated staff as we move on.
Love it.
So I guess in terms of for your audience, I think CFOs, there's a few things that I'd really consider them to do, actually, as well as encouraging them to consider their relationship with all of their members of the executive committee, and think about actually where's that relationship particularly strong, but where does it really need work as well? Where are they less in touch with the different parts of the business, and where are they less at the moment able to influence those decisions and use their insight, and how could they bring their insight better? But also, how do they then keep that better pulse as well on the organization, inviting their teams and teams outside of finance to share their ideas and to share their feedback to help influence the direction of travel?
I love this, and it fit everything you're talking about is what our future finance group have been talking about. They're actually framing it as the chief future officer, and becoming a strategic value partner to the business. So I love it, and I can't wait to hear about number 2, the authentic disruptor. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so disruption, it's hardly a new phrase. In fact, it's probably one of the most overused phrases of the last few years. However, I suppose where the authentic disruptor differs slightly is that, yes, they display a growth mindset, and yes, they are constantly looking to challenge existing ways of working and inform changes to that strategic direction. But critically, they do it in a much more authentic and purposeful way, so that they actually become a highly trusted partner to the business. Now, given COVID absolutely has driven a huge acceleration, really, in the levels of disruption that we're seeing, but actually, there's also been this real kind of soul searching of individuals and this increasing backdrop of authenticity and purpose. So really, I'd encourage CFOs to think about their own personal purpose. Think, why do I exist as a CFO? Why do I come to work in the morning? And how does that actually marry with the organizational purpose that we are trying to create. And how can I use that link between my purpose and that of the organization to really create a safe environment for my team to experiment? How can I create an environment of psychological safety where people feel comfortable to speak up, to raise ideas as well as concerns? And I think this is increasingly important during a period of transformation as well, because CFOs need to think about and be much more deliberate about how they encourage disruption, but how they also behave and display very much authentic behaviors in the way that they transform the function. And I think, given we talk about this post-COVID, emerging hopefully from the pandemic, I think there could be an easy tendency to create, or for finance leaders and leaders in general to seek to create much more artificial stability, given we've been through such a turbulent time. And it could easily be that we then revert back to pre-pandemic ways of working as well. So I'd really encourage all CFOs to make sure that they don't do this, but instead use it as a chance to launch new opportunities. Learn from the best bits of how working had to change over the past couple of years. And actually, by providing a sense of security to staff, you can do that as much from having a clear vision of the future and a clear vision of change, as much as keeping things as is. Take the example that we talk about in the paper of Kodak as well. Finance leaders often have all of the tools at their disposal to transform their own business model, but the bit that they lack is the mindset to put it into action. And that's where this authentic disruptor really comes into play.
I love it. And again, I have to you're just so connected to what we're hearing from all this group of CFOs, right? So we had a virtual session a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things we did was actually share, many of these finance leaders have created a finance team purpose. Mm-hmm. So they actually have a purpose statement, aligned to the business purpose. But I think, to your point about them finding their way in this, they're also leading their team and saying, we have a purpose for our finance and accounting team, and here it is. And we shared with each other all the ones that we're getting. So we're collecting those, but that's, again, spot on. That is, I just love this. All right, now, I can't wait to hear about the next one, the inquisitive storyteller. Again, another big one that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, and I love that, Tom. Love that idea of having a finance purpose statement and showing clearly how that links with the organization. I think that's great. Really, really good. Yeah, so the inquisitive storyteller. So this is, it is what it says on the tin, really, but it's all around joining the dots between, as CFOs, as finance leaders, you've got such a vast array of data, of information, sources of information. And it's about joining the dots between all of those to tell, critically, a very honest story to the business. So some of the skills that underpin this mindset are around really curiosity, around thirst for insight. So they're constantly kind of need to be asking the right questions and probing why is it that the data tells the story that it does, and how can I use critical thinking to actually connect all of those different data sources. How can I then use that to then model different scenarios, because ultimately the only certainty we have now is that there is no certainty. And critically then the skill, and I think generalization, but I think this is the area where potentially it doesn't come quite as naturally to a lot of CFOs, is around using that data to then put a narrative around that change and linking that change to the strategic vision. Because doing that is the way that you can really harness the power of the organization, the collective, to bring everyone along the journey to actually drive change as well.
Yeah.
And I think as we move again, hopefully post-pandemic, that's the critical thing. It is, how do CFOs bring their teams? How do they bring their wider organization on a journey? And what tools do they already have at their disposal to tell a story? How do they then measure the success of that story and the impact that it has, seeking constant feedback, understanding what's working and what isn't, how well are those messages being received, and how well is the underpinning data really helping to sell that vision? And this is where, to the point you made very early on, Tom, linking some of these mindsets can be really helpful as well. So using the inquisitive storyteller mindset alongside that of being an authentic disruptor really can help CFOs to build opportunities from the pandemic to actually help them create stronger organizational performance moving forward.
Yep. I love this. Love this. It's so good to get your perspective on, because, obviously from the deep research that you did. All right. So now number 4, the rational value creator. And again, that's a big theme of our future finance from the beginning, is that the CFO moving to a more integrated value partner in the business, which fits pretty much all 4 of these mindsets. But tell us about the rational value creator.
Yeah, so absolutely, as you say, value creation and the chief value officer and everything that comes with the trends here is absolutely front of mind. I guess the rational value creator is very much focused around the use of judgment to confront complexity. So very much focused around creating long-term business value. So always in pursuit of that long-term business value, recognizing that sometimes that requires a short-term trade-off in order to get that long-term result. But actually extending way beyond your traditional financial metrics as well to some of your non-financial KPIs, and then using all of that insight to actually act as an independent advisor to then inform business decisions. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you, and something that again has probably dominated some of your discussions. But finance leaders today have to measure so much more than just the money. So take the example of climate change, for example. How do finance leaders actually measure the intangibles, such as ESG, such as sustainability, and how do they translate some of those goals into sustainable milestones? To do that, there's got to be a shift to be a lot more outcome focused. They've got to be very much more future focused, leading on future client trends, identifying what customers are probably going to need, and helping the business to ensure that they have the right products in the right place at the right time. And again, I think this has been thrown more into sharp relief as a result of the pandemic, and highlighted its criticality because of the CFO, for example, who rose to the occasion and helped to identify and articulate, well, what really adds value to the organization? And do we need to shift our product strategy? Do we need to shift our portfolio, for example? And those that have managed to do that and really taken that opportunity are now very well positioned to influence the future strategy as well.
Yeah, again, that big topic for our future finance group, and this idea of leading. So they actually said one of the things is we're going to move from being the CF no to the CF KNOW no.
I like that.
So, which is a big part of that, and the mindset that goes along with that. But yeah, there was a stat early on that said at the beginning of the pandemic, the CFO's office was forced to forecast and project 30 times more than any other time in their history.
Wow.
And that's continued. So your whole point about establishing new business model, this whole idea of innovation and the CFO is another topic that we've talked about, right? So we're both supporting the core business and the edge businesses, right? Because innovation is now showing up in every business. And the CFO is a whole different set of metrics and things you have to think about when you support that. So I could see these mindsets playing a big role in being able to move from the core to the edge and support the entire business and get your team to also follow you in that journey.
Yeah, exactly. All
right. So now we covered a lot about this mindset thing. So I just want to see so when you look at these mindset sets, what do you see as the biggest gap for CFOs on average? And where's the biggest challenge for them, again, as they start to think about how to apply the wisdom in this white paper?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest gap, and I think I alluded to it earlier, is probably around the inquisitive storyteller. Storytelling is something that I know the SEMA and the association, you've got some great offerings around this as well. It's something that has become increasingly important and recognized as being so amongst the finance community. But actually really being able to tell a value-based business story with the data is the area where I would probably say, from my experience, and certainly it was highlighted by the CFOs we interviewed as well, as being one of the critical skills that's needed for the future. But in contrast, I think the one that they probably find most challenging could be the authentic disruptor. And the reason I say that is Twofold, really. Firstly, the idea of authenticity, by its very nature, it requires individuals to be quite humble. It requires them to be quite vulnerable in some respects, and that's not something that comes easily necessarily to any leader. And those in the finance space are not excluded from that. But also, I think the extent of disruption that we've seen over the past few years, it would be very, very easy for CFOs and for finance leaders to almost just revert back to the way that things used to be done. And I think what we really need to be able to do is say, actually, finance has been propelled into the spotlight. Right? Finance has absolutely taken on a more strategic role. We've been talking about the strategic importance of finance for years and years and years, but that really is happening now. And it's important that CFOs actually capitalize on that, and that they constantly ask, how can they disrupt in the future? How can they continue to look for better ways of doing things? And I think the pandemic has very much sort of pushed us to be more disruptive, but it's important that we harness that and we continue to do that, but very much in a positive way, recognizing that, we are still going to continue to see the negative disruption in the world around us as well. And I think I mentioned a moment ago about it's very easy to assume that the only way to bring about a sense of stability is by keeping things the same. But actually, a very clearly articulated, compelling, and exciting change vision can be far more liberating and give people a clear purpose. And similarly to your example with the finance team's purpose, for people to actually engage with, and give people within that, finance leaders can set that direction, they can set that story, they can set that disruption, and they can really get their team behind it and give them the freedom to actually operate within that and to help them achieve that vision, shifting that vision where needed, because clearly disruption, the whole point of disruption is it's by no means static. We constantly need to look to change. But actually, by developing these mindsets, CFOs they can identify, they can articulate, and they can then deliver on all of these exciting opportunities, taking their functions with them for a journey to create strong and stable and businesses fit for the future, which ultimately is what we're looking to do.
This has been awesome spending this time with you, Liz, and some just amazing advice. I want all of our listeners to be thinking about, some of the key things that stuck out for me, right? Well, the whole idea of the mindsets, all four of them are important, and your best bet's to find your natural one and then learn the other three so you can dial them at the right time, because you're going to need them continuously, because this isn't going to be over. That's the other message, right? It's going to be a continuous, the next wave will come after we get through this transformation. And then the second one, I think you're exactly right. We can't go back to the way things were, which is the natural time. Everybody's like, let's get everybody back in the office now, right? It's the minute the COVID things go down, everybody's like, get them back. And I think we have to rethink and say, what have we learned from all this? And what can we be doing, to your point, to continue that authentic disruption? Let's keep on moving us forward in both finance and the whole organization in this. I think this is a defining moment for finance accounting. To your point, we've been talking about this stuff for 20 years, but now it's here and it's all accelerated. And now it's our opportunity to keep it moving. So thank you so much for being with us today, Liz. This has been awesome. You can follow her, Liz Hirst, Hirst, on LinkedIn. You can visit Wharton Business Consulting online at whartonbc.co.uk. We'll post that in the chat as well. And then on Twitter, it's at WhartonBC, all one word. Thank you so much for being here with us, Liz, and good luck. We hope that we'll be having you back here, I think, for a follow-up, because this has been awesome.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much for having me, Tom. Take care.
Thank you.